which the recipient of the catalogue is only to scrape away, and this is what appears. There are two women in black PVC outfits to left and right, very, very kind of Diana Rigg of the time, which I can just about remember the event. In 1966, at this solo show at the Grosvenor Gallery, which is currently being recreated at the Grosvenor Gallery, this was one of the works. His work was not receiving the critical acclaim it had received for almost a decade by this stage. This was a difficult and searching time for Souza, and a period in which he was drinking quite heavily. One can speculate that this was in different ways a dark night of the soul for the artist, in which his sense of martyred exile as an excoriating outsider in a still turgidly respectable society, and someone who was relentlessly reviewed and categorised in the press always as a black Indian painter living in Britain, and nothing else really, led him to a radical point of no return. In one way, this exhibition of black paintings was an audacious artistic experiment, which seemed inevitably to lead to minimal critical or monetary success. But in a sense, these black paintings were the continuation and culmination of Souza's artistic exploration over nearly the last 20 years. The mystical evocativeness of his art seems to find its ultimate expression in these paintings, I think, in which, though predominantly black on black, have silvery grey and white accents which shine out with marvellous lucidity and subtlety. These paintings are a skillful manifestation of a kind of via negativa, by means of which a transcendent luminosity is expressed by means of absence, by what is not in the paintings, namely exuberant colour. He said in 1966, black is the most serious, is the most mysterious of colours. Renoir found it impossible and said a spot of black was like a hole in the painting. I cannot agree, he said. Colour is now disturbing in a bad way. Within a year of making his black paintings, Souza had left London permanently to live in New York. In Untitled, black head with checkerboard shirt, superfluous eyes, noses, mouth, ears, etc. I'm referring to this painting. These detailed features have been abandoned in an austere composition which does not sacrifice but rather heightens the sense of tender gravity and fearsome regard seen in his earlier portraits of students, Buddhist monks and Catholic priests. These portraits were always tending towards circumambient blackness from which an inner light emerges. The same, in fact, can be said of this transfixing portrait. It sacrifices nothing. In this painting, but bust of a man before an arched window, multiple eyes, if that is indeed what they are, return our fixed regard quite phantasmagorically and transfixingly. What appears to be a jacket, shirt and tie takes on a highly abstract, even hieratic appearance, appearing to be sculpted out of glinting coal. In his painting, Mystic Ebony, underpainting of red resonates sparingly around the eyes, neck, shoulders and one of the breasts. Background motifs of a dazzling black sun and possible abstracted fruits reiterate the orbic sensuousness and splendour of the female form here. A feeling of intricate sensual ecstasy is curiously enforced here by the near monochrome palette. I don't know how clear this is, if you can make that picture out. His painting of lovers is a wonderfully animated, highly legible composition. Well, I hope it's legible at this moment. It was legible to me on the page, or when I sat in front of the painting. It's a painting in which every fold of the sheets, every straining sinew of the lovers is evoked with real acuity. This dramatic amatory scene, painted black and black, may have seemed especially shocking at the time. Similarly, Souza's black-on-black paintings of cityscapes were as tautly structured and scaffolded, as opulently vegetative and detailed as his earlier multicoloured paintings of similar subjects. I would argue that nothing is lost here in terms of quality and intensity in these new paintings. In fact, the overall blackness serves paradoxically only to highlight a sense of occluded mystery. I want now to look briefly at some works by other artists who either inspired and influenced Souza, especially in the use of black paint, or who offer some interesting contemporary parallels. Souza was a regular visitor to the National Gallery in London, where he admired works by Titian, Vermeer, Rembrandt and Goya. Titian was for him the supreme old master, and he made quite a number of paintings after the artist, in which he kept to the original structures. He made a painting after Titian's Emperor Charles V, in which he exaggerated the darks and lights of the original, using vacant circles to reproduce the emperor's hauntingly diffident expression. The intensely dramatic, visionary treatment of space and the expressionistic dissolution of form and perspective in El Greco's art is known to have strongly affected Picasso's development, and such tendencies are foremost in Souza's art too. It is sometimes conjured that Souza's often vituperatively witty black paintings were partly inspired in homage to Goya's black paintings. Goya's pictures are rich in ochres, browns and whites, whereas Souza's black paintings are sparse indeed in coloured pigment. But the artist did share a fierce anti-clericalism, and Souza's paintings of popes and other ecclesiastics depict them as absurdist gangsters. In Rouault's painting of Christ on the Cross, we see an affinity with Souza's own figurative portrayals, notably in the use of robust art contouring. Though Souza scathingly ridiculed the church, he acknowledged the tremendous influence it had on him from childhood onwards, such as in the grand architecture he wrote and the splendour of the services, the enormous crucifix with the impaled image of a man supposed to be the Son of God, scourged and dripped with matted hair, tangled in plaited thorns. Picasso's fragmentation of time and space, his cubist explorations into the liberating perspectives of African and Oceanic art, reverberate through Souza's art. An Indian critic, Yashodhara Dalmia, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, has remarked that Souza's early works were incorporating the primitive through the mediation of the West. In reclaiming the primitive, then Souza was virtually reinventing his own art, and that is where his strength lay. In the post-war art of the French painters Deborah and Walz, we can see the kind of virtually hallucinogenic fragmentation of structures and form which parallel many of the experiments of Souza. Deborah and Walz's responses to the utter breakdown of Western civilization in the war was a radically childlike style, rooted in the art of deep cultural outsiders, such as those living in mental asylums, abandoned by the system they could not to any degree conform to. Souza was himself a deeply cultured outsider. That's a painting by Walz. It's actually a portrait of the poet Henri Michaud. The Buddhist-inspired intuitive approach of the painter Alan Davey in the late 40s and 50s was rooted in a belief in archetypal symbols from a collective unconscious, often priestly figures which he delineated with a calligraphic tautness that has affinities with Souza's own approach. The Londoner Gerald Wiles' paintings from the same period, such as Beast in Landscape 1949, evoke the ruthless heart of a modern society in a kind of painting treatment with the kind of urgency that was familiar to Souza. Francis Bacon and Souza used to meet quite often in Soho and were familiar with each other's work. In Bacon's 1953 study for a portrait, we see human features emerging with dazzling, rather spectral pallor from a black abyss. Both Bacon and Souza intended to jolt the spectator into a visceral awareness of the enigma of life, and also the rotten rootlessness of contemporary society. Looking at the work of two contemporary painters, Roger Hilton here and Keith Vaughan, the latter who was a tenant for a time in Souza's flat in Belsize Park, we can see their prominent use of black paint as part of a new developing language in which barriers between figuration and abstraction were being transcended. Vaughan at this time, he had seen an exhibition of pop art, I think at the Whitechapel Art Gallery, and he'd reacted hugely against what he saw as its slick, facile tendencies and its, bright, too easy use of colour. And he retreated to darker and darker paintings. And it might be said that Souza similarly retreated away from surface posturing of painting into these all black on black paintings. In the early 60s, the use of black paint was being explored in different ways by artists internationally. Soulage in France was making abstract paintings in which he said, using black and white, or even black alone, it is possible to achieve what I can only describe as an effect of colour. I think that statement is very relevant to Souza's black on black paintings, which to me are immensely colourful. Then Yves Klein in France was also making intensively monochrome paintings in the late 50s and 60s of orange, red, pink and blue pigments. The black of his paintings around 1961 was caused by actually burning the picture surface as seen in these pictures. It is very possible, quite likely, that Souza was aware of these extreme departures as a way of evoking the qualities or the non-qualities of the void. Yet Souza's disquietingly black on black paintings are by no means nihilistic in my view, or in any way blacked out. They magically retain a powerfully innate sense of structure, most intricately delineated, as you can see in the painting here, and allude always to our universal humanity.
Which has been said already, presents Souza's black paintings for the first time since Souza staged his solo show in 1966 at the Grosvenor Gallery. Until then, I'd never seen Souza's black paintings, and I was completely bowled over. So I've moved away from what I was going to talk about, because really I just wanted to talk about the paintings. And so what I'm going to try and do, what this is really is a first attempt to articulate what captivated and intrigued me about these remarkable paintings, which you haven't seen. You really, I mean, although they have reproduced quite well, you really have to go and see these things in their materiality. Rashid Arian went over to New York, where Souza was living in the late 80s, when he was preparing a show for the Hayward Gallery. And he quotes Souza saying that first time I made love to a white woman, I thought that the whole British Empire had collapsed in my bed. Souza, you have to remember, arrived in London in 1949, and he stayed here until 1966, and as has been said, he went to New York. But the period in which he lived in London coincided almost exactly with the period in which the whole British Empire effectively collapsed across the globe. Between 1947 and 1949, Britain ceded power to independent governments in India, Pakistan, Burma, and Ceylon, now Sri Lanka. And the retreat from empire gained momentum through the 1950s and 60s, with former colonial territories throughout the world gaining their independence. Those of you who had the fortune or misfortune to be brought up in a colonial culture may recognise these maps. These are very popular in colonial textbooks as maps of the British Empire. So they fell. 1956, Egypt and Sudan. 1957, Ghana. 1960, Uganda, Nigeria, South Africa, British Somaliland. 1961, Sierra Leone, Kuwait. 1962, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago. 1963, Kenya, Malaysia. 1964, Zambia, Malawi. 1965, Gambia, Maldives, Singapore, Barbados. But far from being a managed, orderly retreat from empire, the process of decolonisation, if it indeed can be described as a process, was frequently chaotic and violent. But within a few years, the imperial map of the world, which had once differentiated Britain's colonial territories from those of France or Spain or Portugal in distinctive blocks of colour, had now effectively dissolved, giving way to the contours of nation-states which no longer derive their geographical colour from a remote imperial power. In stark contrast to his earlier works, in which Souza had applied colour pigment as though he were creating an intricate jewel-like mosaic, Souza uses black pigment in thick, bold layers in these black paintings, bearing on any underlying colour pigment, which if you look very closely, occasionally kind of dribbles to the edges. And looking at Souza's black paintings, I'm reminded of other artists whose works imagine a post-imperial, post-colonial space. In particular, this work by Mona Hatoum called Projection 2006, which configures this pure cartography, unsullied by borders, delineations of nation-states or place names. It's made from cotton and abaca, and Hatoum's map of the world, which is based on Repeater's projection, registers the traces of depressions and elevations of different continents, without, of course, the limitation of territories or frontiers. And a hemp and linen map collapses borders, it erases place names, and it refashions the globe as a neutral, white, uninscribed configuration of spaces. Similarly, Souza's blackened landscape has subsumed its natural contours beneath a sea of black, compelling the viewer to search for clues in the shapes of what might be trees or rivers. We stood in front of this quite a long time, didn't we, with Connor, trying to quite figure out what this was and what lay beneath those thick swirls of black and castor oil. I'm also reminded, and this is a very cool slide, please forgive me, of Frank Bowling's map paintings. It goes to show really how rubbish reproduction is for any really great painting and how you just have to go and see them. These were made a little later than Souza's black paintings in the late 1960s and early 70s, and you can actually go and see some of these. They're being shown at Hale's Gallery at the moment. And they project a radical new cartography that takes shape beneath